Hey friends, this is day 474 of Russian war against Ukraine. In the last week, too many things have happened for us to cover in any amount of detail, but we're going to focus on two main things out of which everything else sort of flows. Number one, we're going to talk about the offensive of Ukraine in the east and the south, and then with the remainder of our time, we're going to talk about the Kahovka Dam and the explosion that happened there and the flooding and what that means for the region, for the war, for the offensive and especially the media coverage. So number one, a Ukrainian offensive. By different data, it started about a week ago, last Monday, when Ukrainian troops went from shaping exercises to more of an offensive, immediate action on two directions. One of them was in the east of Ukraine, another one was on Zaporizhia region, which is southeast. And the reason we don't know exactly when it started, we don't know exactly how it's going, is because Ukrainian command is keeping quiet about it. So one thing I wanted to mention, and what's important for us to understand, is that a lot of the media that's reporting on Ukrainian progress, they're not taking Ukrainian data as the information, because there's no Ukrainian data. Ukrainian field command are not releasing any information apart from how many kilometers we have taken in each day. So first day it was like about 5 kilometers, which is a huge leap, and second day was about 12,000, 1 kilometer to 100 meters, which is a little less, but still impressive speed. We know that Ukraine had so far, in about a week, freed about 7 Ukrainian towns, which is a lot faster, like lightning speed compared to what Russian forces have been doing in the last 10 months in Ukraine, especially if you remember their advance on Bakhmut. It took them 10 months to take that little town. So from what we know, it's going exceptionally well. It's going better than what had been planned, especially if you take into consideration that Russia had the last 10 months, let's say actively 6 months, to prepare the fortifications in that area. So Ukrainians are advancing, which always means that we're suffering a lot more loss, because whoever advances has a disadvantage as compared to the ones who are protecting the territory. So even with those conditions, Ukraine is making great strides. Now, you may have heard from, I saw this in The Economist yesterday, and plus somebody sent me an article from Wall Street Journal, which are saying that, well, Ukraine it's not as impressive, it's not as had been thought, it's not as anybody had expected. We would see this lightning speed, and Ukraine would free Donbass, the day two. Economists reported that the Ukraine's advance has mixed results, and the reason that is happening is precisely because this data is not Ukrainian. What these Western media are basing their information on are two sources. One is the official Russian propaganda. They have the General Konashenko, who kind of goes on every night and says, we've killed 3 million Ukrainian troops and destroyed 5,000 HIMARS systems, and it's laughable what they're saying. Number two is they're taking the Russian war correspondents. These are agents or sympathizers of Kremlin who are disguising themselves as independent reporters in the field, video bloggers, whatever. And that's how you see, for example, the same picture of an Abrams tank, the Leopard tank destroyed, but from 20 different angles, and they're saying, well, this is 20 different tanks. So that's why in the media you see the response that, well, it's not as great as has been reported. That's just because you're listening to Russians. That's not really great journalistic standard. From what we're hearing internally in Ukraine from our analysts, our sources, is that compared to the plans that have been made and the expected advance based on these plans, the command is seeing about 2x of speed that they expected. So it's going exceptionally well. Of course, there are mistakes. Of course, we're suffering losses in the east, and the pictures of Leopard tanks and a couple of the armored armored personnel carrier vehicles. Those are mistakes, but of course you would see this in any kind of a battle. Okay, with this lack of information, we can only draw with extremely broad strokes. But the good news is that it's going well, and already 7 towns are freed. So we're going to keep our eye on the progress there. Number 2, the Kahovka Dam that was blown up last week. As you know, what happened was the Russians put a mine when they were retreating from Kherson. They put mines within that road that kind of goes over the barrier, and when the time came, and we're going to talk about motivations about it in a minute, but when the time came, they blew the internal charges in it, and it broke pretty much every gate that was keeping the higher plateau of water. It flowed down, it spread around, and several Ukrainian towns and Kherson were flooded to a point where a lot of the local population had to evacuate. The biggest devastation there, of course, is that the irrigation system for agriculture had been destroyed, which means that about 14% of Ukrainian agricultural exports are now non-existent. So 14% is pretty huge, is pretty devastating, which of course means that the grain that used to be grown there and exported to the countries in Africa and some Middle East, that's disappearing now. So as a result of Russian action, that's now in jeopardy. And in fact, the farmers who live there, they're now saying that we have to requalify to other jobs. We have to train for something else because we will not be able to do farming here for the next 20 years. So that's pretty devastating as far as the ecological damage. And of course, a lot of people were displaced. A lot of those houses were flooded. Some were just smitten off the path of the water. By now, so we're about like day 5, day 6 into it. By now, the water had started to subside. But instead of going down, it starts to going out, and it's damaging more and more territory. Now, the question, of course, in the last week has been who blew the dam, and to me, it's very obvious. Of course, when we talk about motivation, Russians had the motivation and the means to do it because they have been occupying the dam for the last few months. It was under their control. There are all kinds of weird theories that it was not really an explosion. It was sort of an erosion and wear and tear because of the constant fighting, and Ukrainians were shooting at it. That's all bullshit. And if you want to get a more in-depth analytic, I actually on my Facebook I reposted somebody who goes point by point, analyzing what happened and dismantling some of those mythical theories of what happened. But the summary of it is that Russians blew it inside, fearing that Ukrainian offensive is going to happen across the river, across Dnipro to cross to the left side. And of course, every time you're talking about rivers, we're speaking about from the point of view of a ship going south. So like if you're on a ship downstream Dnipro, the left side is the east side of Ukraine. So Russians, fearing that Ukraine will cross the border, blew the dam so that it will go wide and Ukrainian troops will not be able to move to the other side. So that's pretty standard. That this is not the first time it happened. During World War II, both the Soviet troops and the German troops did this as they were retreating. In fact, this is a commonly known retreat tactic. Those who are on the offensive, those who are attacking, do not blow up infrastructure in front of them. That's craziness. So which adds all the more to the outrage I and many of my compatriots feel of people like Carlson, who are spewing this nonsense about the Ukrainians did it and they're genociding their own people. what a load of bullshit. I mean, this is. I knew that journalistic standards were coming down pretty fast in the last couple of years, but this is just breaks any barriers on the way to zero. No data, no nothing. I suppose facts do not play any role anymore when you want to reach your desired political outcomes. So, but that happened. That did change plans by how, and Ukrainian command admitting that did change plans on how the Ukrainian offensive is going to go, but it did not make a big dent in it. Right now, there is rumors of another Russian terrorist act that they're preparing in Crimea. So the situation with Crimea in connection to the dam is that that dam was the main reservoir of supplied fresh water into Crimea. So now that's destroyed. So for about like 10 years probably until you can restore anything. So now Russians, it's rumored, are going to create a diversion in Crimea's chemical plant, which will release what's this gas? I think it's nitrogen, right? Ammiac. I don't know. I'll look it up. Gas which will cover Kherson region and will of course poison Ukrainian population there. So we'll see if that happens, or if the publicity of it will stop it from happening. Another concern with the dam is that it also supplied the reservoir of cooling water for the Zaporizhia nuclear energy station. So the water that was sort of on the upper plateau supplied water into the reservoir, which went into the nuclear station, and that water was used to cool down the rods that were producing energy in the station. For right now, the management of the station, which still is under Russian control, are saying that we're still good for a couple of months, but after that, we're going to need to find another source of the cooling water. So this Russian terrorist act had actually put in jeopardy the world in the form of another Chernobyl. So it was a heinous act against Ukraine. In fact, we know there's two internal communications that have been intercepted by Ukrainian internal affairs, SBU, which one of them is two commanders talking to each other, one trying to warn the another one, like, get out of the way because the dam's going to blow, which of course proves that they did it because they knew when that was going to happen. But they did not warn everybody. And in fact, they warned only those regiments who had certain tanks and certain personnel carriers that they cared about, but the rest were washed away. So Russian army actually suffered their own loss at this terrorist attack, which tells you pretty much about how much Russian army cares about their own people. In fact, these animals, when Khersonian people were trying to evacuate, and there's a video of this, there's pictures of this, they were shooting at the columns of people trying to leave town, evacuate. On the left side of the Dnieper, which Russians control, they did not do anything to evacuate or even let people out of the town to evacuate. They just let them drown, let them sit on their roofs for several days, and it's horrible, and it tells you a lot what you need to know about Russia and the value of human life in Russia. So to suggest that Ukraine would do this with the history of Ukrainian warfare, for example, Mariupol, the reason why Ukraine didn't shell Mariupol to get the Russians the hell out of there is because they cared about the population that still remained there. So Ukraine is bound by convention and rules of the war, while Russia is bound by nothing. They stop at nothing. Human life to them means nothing. So even by that, you can say that Ukraine would never do anything like that, especially that it didn't make any military sense or didn't have any motivation of that sort. Of course, Russia did it. It's ridiculous to suggest anything otherwise. All right, friends. Let me see if I forgot anything. Okay, so by now the effects of the immediate breaking down of the dam are wearing down. The water's coming down, and the Ukrainian offensive keeps pushing on. I will keep you updated on what's going on. There's still, I mean, juicy information about the Prigozhin, who's the chief of Wagner, and his conflict with the Ministry of Defense in Russia, and they're out in open conflict. This morning, for example, Russian government, the Ministry of Defense had released this this act to subordinate all the what they call volunteer groups, which of course includes Wagner, to include them in the Ministry of Defense. And Wagner said, "No way, we're not doing that. We're a special squadron and special forces that serve Russia. We're not going to be subordinate to the Ministry of Defense." And it looks like the conflict is escalating, and we all hope that they will just shoot each other to hell. That's it, friends. This is what's going on. There's a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, even in the midst of tragedy of everything that's happening in Ukraine. We know that we will win. We know that the entire civilized Western world is behind Ukraine, and this gives us all the hope we need that Ukraine will win. Thank you for supporting Ukraine, and thank you for praying for us and holding and crossing our fingers for our troops. We believe Ukraine will be free, and once again, in peaceful Ukraine, I will be honored to host you personally and give you a tour of my hometown Cherkasy and maybe Kyiv. So keep that in mind.